Della Mercer had not asked a single soul for charity in the 11 months since the creditors put their padlock on her father's orchard gate. She had buried him in October, watched two men in clean coats carry off the deed in November, and by the following autumn, she had learned to keep her chin level even when her stomach was folding in on itself. She was 24 years old. She was a wide woman, broad through the shoulders and broad through the hip, and she had spent the better part of her life listening to people decide things about her before she opened her mouth. Now she had one wagon, a tired mule named Pewter, and 41 beeswax candles, 19 jars of clover honey, and a wooden case of salve tins that needed selling before the high passes filled with snow and sealed her into one more poor winter. She was not riding into that mountain town, hunting for sympathy. She was hunting for a counter to set her goods on, and a man with money to lay them down. If your own heart is already pulling for her, then do this woman a kindness, settle in, and stay to the end of her story, and leave the name of your town down below, because she is about to surprise a great many people who thought they had her figured. Now ease yourself back to the silver camp of Hartshorn, Colorado, in the fall of 1886, and meet the young woman that town was in no hurry to make room for. Hartshorn sat in a fold of the Sawatch foothills where two creeks met, and it smelled of ore, dust, and frying fat, and the particular sourness of a place where men were paid in silver and spent it before sundown. The main street ran crooked along the water, lined with false-fronted buildings whose fresh paint was already cracking in the thin mountain air. When Della's wagon came rocking down out of the timber, and the iron tires bit into the rutted street, a clutch of men loitering on the boardwalk in front of the Bonanza Saloon turned to look, the way men in such places always turned, because watching strangers was free, and there was little enough that was free in a mining camp. She felt their eyes travel over her and settle, and she kept Pewter walking. "Lord, hutch," one of them called, loud, the way a man is loud when he wants the whole street to hear his cleverness. "You reckon that mule pulled the wagon, or just the woman?" The laughter came easy and mean. A second man wheezed, something she did not catch, and a third laughed hardest of all. Della did not turn her head. She had heard the joke before in a dozen shapes, and she had long since stopped giving such men the gift of her face. She pulled Pewter to a stop in front of a tall building with assay office and mercantile painted across the top, set her brake, and climbed down the way she had taught herself to climb down years ago, square and unhurried, planting both feet because she knew the world would make a show of her if she let it. The mercantile inside was warm and crowded with goods. Behind the long counter stood a slim man of about 50, in a good gray waistcoat, with a watch chain across his front, and the soft, well-fed hands of a man who had not lifted anything heavier than a ledger in 20 years. He looked up at the bell over the door, took in the whole of her in one slow sweep, and let his attention drift back down to the column of figures he was adding. "Help you," he said. It was not a question, and there was no warmth in it. "I hope so." Della set her shoulders. "My name is Della Mercer. I've come up from the flats with hand-poured beeswax candles, comb and strained honey, and a salve I make myself beeswax, tallow, and pine pitch, good for chapped hands and cracked heels and burns. I was told Hartshorn lays in winter stores before the snow. I'm looking to sell outright or to leave goods on consignment." The man set down his pen. His eyes did the thing she expected, starting at her face and traveling and coming back, calculating, the way a man counts the cost of a horse. "Royce Pelham," he said, as though the name should mean something. "I own this store. I own the assay office next door, and I hold paper on half the claims in this gulch. I buy in bulk from Denver houses, Miss Mercer. I don't take peddler's candles. These aren't peddler's candles. Beeswax burns cleaner than tallow and twice as slow, and it doesn't gutter and smoke in a draft. Any man working a night shift underground would rather light one of mine than choke on a tallow dip." She set a single candle on the counter, pale gold, smooth as a river stone. "I'll let you have a dozen to test against whatever you're selling. If your customers don't ask for more, you've lost nothing." Pelham looked at the candle and did not touch it. "I have all the shelf I need," he said, and picked his pen back up. "There's no room in Hartshorn for what you're carrying. You'd do better to turn that mule around before the weather turns it for you." The bell jangled behind her as the door opened and shut. Della took the candle back, slid it into her coat pocket, and walked out without letting him see the heat in her face. She tried the dry goods store farther down, and the man there told her his wife did the buying, and his wife was visiting her sister in Buena Vista. She tried the boarding house, where a woman with a mouth like a coin slot allowed that the candles were pretty, but that pretty did not feed boarders. By the time the light went long and orange across the false fronts, Della had sold 4 jars of honey to a miner's wife, who pressed the coins into her hand and said quietly, "Don't mind Pelham. He owns the air folks breathe up here, and he charges them for it. 4 jars, $1.20. It would not buy hay for pewter, and a room for herself. Both." She walked the mule down toward the lower end of the street where the buildings thinned, and that was where she came to the livery, a long, well-kept barn with a feed store built onto the front of it, and a sign that read A, brand, livery, and feed in plain black letters with no flourish. A tall man in shirt sleeves was forking hay down from a loft, and a boy of about 17 was raking the run. The man came down the ladder when he saw her, wiping his hands on a rag, and she braced herself for whatever was coming. What came was evening. "You looking to stable that mule, or to sell him? Because I'll tell you now, he's done in. Whoever sold him to you, sold you trouble. He's mine since he was a colt, and he's just tired," Della said. "I can pay for a night's stall and feed. I can't pay much." The man looked at the wagon, at the crates lashed under the canvas, at the candle she still had in her pocket, the top of it showing. He did not look at her the way the others had. He looked at the wagon the way a man looks at work that has been done carefully. "What's under the canvas?" "Candles, honey, salve." She heard the flatness in her own voice and didn't try to fix it. "Nobody in this town wants any of it." Asa Brandt. He put out his hand, and when she took it, he shook it once, firm, like he would shake any person's. "That's Tobias raking. Put your mule in the 3rd stall. There's water and good hay, and we'll square the cost in the morning when you're not tired enough to agree to a bad bargain." He nodded at her pocket. "Beeswax? You know it by sight? My mother kept bees in Ohio. I'd know that color anywhere." He almost smiled, and didn't quite. "Tobias, take the lady's wagon around back where the wind doesn't get it." She slept that night in the loft over the feed store, on a bed of clean straw with a horse blanket Asa swore was fresh from the line, and somewhere near full dark, when she had given up on supper and was telling her stomach to be quiet, a knock came at the foot of the ladder and Asa's voice with it. "There's a plate down here. My sister Edith runs the eating house 2 doors up, and she always cooks for a dozen, whether a dozen come or not. This was bound for the pigs otherwise." A pause. "It's not charity. It's surplus. There's a difference. And I'd thank you not to argue it with me tonight." Della climbed down. There was a tin plate on a stool, beans and a thick slice of ham, and 2 biscuits still warm, and a mug of coffee beside it. She had been hungry since a heel of bread at noon, and she was too worn down to make a show of pride about it. "Tell your sister I'm obliged," she said, and sat and ate, and did not let him see how much it meant. What changed things was not Pelham, and was not the men outside the saloon. What changed things was a stable hand named Tobias Reed, splitting his thumb to the bone on a busted wagon brace, and Asa, out of pure helplessness, knocking on the feed store door at dawn to ask, did she have anything for it. Della came down with a tin of her salve and a clean strip of cotton, cleaned the wound, packed it, and wrapped it tight. And 3 days later, when the boy peeled the wrapping back, the skin had closed, pink and clean, with no proud flesh and no smell. Tobias showed it to every soul who came through the livery. He showed it to the teamsters and the mule skinners and the men who came to buy feed, and he told them where it came from, and he told them, with the fierce loyalty of a boy who has been treated decently, that the woman who made it knew her business. They came after that, one at a time, the way men come when they have made up their minds slowly. A mule skinner with a saddle gall on his palm, a miner with a burn down his forearm from a careless lamp, a widow with a baby whose chin was raw with teething rash. Della set up a plank and barrel counter in the corner of the feed store that Asa cleared without making a fuss of it, and she sold salve and candles and honey, and she priced them fair and held to her prices, and she kept a ledger in a careful hand, because her father had taught her that a woman who keeps clean books is harder to cheat. One man came who meant to be unpleasant. His name was Dawes, a big-shouldered teamster who hauled for Pelham. And he came in not because he needed anything, but because he had decided, somewhere out on the road, what he thought about a fat woman keeping shop. And he was not the kind to let the truth in front of him interfere with the opinion he'd packed in. He dropped a torn leather glove on her counter from a height, so it slapped down without his fingers ever coming near hers. "Stitch that," he said. "If you can hold a needle with hands like sausages." The feed store went quiet. Tobias, mucking a stall behind the partition, went still. Della looked at the glove. Then she looked up at Dawes, and she did not hurry. "I can stitch it," she said. "2 cents for the work, and 4 cents, because you threw it at me like I was a slop bucket. Next time you'll learn to set a thing down in a person's hand, or you'll learn what I charge a man who can't." She held out her palm. "You can pay me now, or you can take your glove to Pelham and see what he stitches it with." Dawes's jaw worked. He looked around for the laugh that usually backed him up, and the men at the counter looked at the floor or at the rafters, because the boy's healed thumb was a fact, and her clean books were a fact. And a man's foolishness in front of facts is a lonely thing. He dug 6 cents out of his vest, set it down on the counter so hard it bounced, and left the glove. Behind the partition, Tobias made a sound like a kettle just before it sings. By the time the first real snow came, Della Mercer had a steady trade and a little money put by, and she had stopped flinching when the bell over the feed store door rang. She had also begun to notice something that troubled her, and it began with the widow. The widow's name was Cora Finnegan, and her husband had died in the spring when a winds flooded in the Little Maud claim, drowned in the dark 100 feet down. Cora came to buy candles because she sat up nights doing piecework sewing to feed 2 children, and one evening, paying out her coins, she said in a low, ashamed voice that she was going to lose the claim too. Her husband's claim. Pelham held a lien on it, she said, for a grubstake debt she had never heard her husband mention, with a paper her husband had signed that she did not recognize the look of. The circuit judge was coming in the spring to settle the season's disputes, and Pelham's lawyer said the paper was good, and Cora had no money for a lawyer of her own. Della asked to see the paper. She did not know the law, but she knew ledgers, and she knew her father's lesson that a lie always has a date that doesn't fit. She read the grubstake note by candlelight, and then she went very still, because the note was dated the 14th of June, and Cora's husband had been dead since the 9th of May. It was not only Cora. Once Della knew the shape of the thing, she saw it everywhere. She kept books for half the men who came through the livery now, by their own request, because she was honest and quick, and they trusted her. And she began to see it in the small talk over her counter. A dead miner's claim, sold cheap to Pelham's man. A widow's lien called in. A grubstake note that nobody remembered signing. Pelham was buying up the gulch one funeral at a time, papering over the theft with notes dated after the men were already in the ground. It was tidy. It was nearly invisible. It worked because the men it robbed were dead, and the women it robbed had no money and no voice, and no one in the world who would sit down and add the columns. Della sat down and added the columns. She did it at night, after the counter closed, with Asa sometimes sitting across the feed store table, not saying much, sharpening tack, or reading a week-old Denver paper, while she copied dates into a tally book of her own. She did it because Cora Finnegan had 2 children, and a face that had stopped expecting anything good, and because a long time ago, men in clean coats had carried off her father's deed, and she had been too young and too poor and too alone to do anything but watch. She was not too poor now. She was not alone now, and she could read a date. "You know what you're doing," Asa said one night, quiet, not looking up from his paper. "Pelham owns the marshal's salary, in everything but name. You go after him careful, or you don't go at all." "I know how to be careful," Della said. "I've been careful my whole life. Being careful is the thing I'm best at, and I'm sick of it being all I'm good for." She closed the tally book. He robbed a dead man and a hungry widow and dated the paper like he thought no one would ever check. Somebody's going to check. It's going to be me. The marshal was named Quill, and he was not as far in Pelham's pocket as Asa feared, mostly because he was a lazy man rather than a wicked one, and laziness can sometimes be steered. Della laid the dated notes in front of him on a Tuesday. 3 claims, 3 dead men, 3 grubstake notes signed after the burials, and she watched him understand it slowly, the way Beck the mule skinner had understood the boy's healed thumb, recalibrating something behind his eyes, He did not want the trouble. But the dates were the dates, and a circuit judge was coming. And a marshal who sat on forged paper after it was put in his hand would have a hard time explaining himself when the judge came asking. "Bring me everything you've got," Quill said finally, "and bring it before the judge gets here. And so help me, Miss Mercer, if you're wrong about one comma of this, it lands on you and not on me." "I'm not wrong," Della said. "Add the columns yourself." What nearly undid all of it was the spring. The snow that had sealed the gulch in November began to go in April, and it went the way mountain snow sometimes goes, not slow and kind, but all at once. A warm wind off the south called a chinook that ate 3 feet of pack in 2 days and ran it down the gulch in a brown roar. Coil Creek, which had been a polite ribbon of water all winter, swelled and yellowed and climbed its banks, and on the worst morning of it, a cold rain came down on top of the melt, and the creek went from high to murderous in the space of an hour. The schoolhouse sat on the low ground near the footbridge, because low ground was cheap ground, and the schoolmistress had 11 children inside it when the water came over the bank. The men of Hartshorn ran down to the creek and stood on the high side and looked at the brown water tearing past, throwing whole logs end over end, and they did what men do when a thing is plainly too dangerous. They calculated, and they shouted, and they did not go in. The footbridge was already gone, just 2 pilings left, and the schoolhouse floor was awash, and through the one window they could see the schoolmistress lifting children up onto the desks, and the water still rising. Asa was rigging a rope to a wagon team, but the team spooked at the roar, and a strong man named Garrett, a different Garrett than any she'd known, a real one, a good one, waded into his waist with a line, and was knocked flat and dragged 10 feet before he caught the rope and hauled himself back, white-faced, coughing creek. The water took men off their feet. That was the plain fact of it. The men of Hartshorn were lean and hard, and the current peeled them off the gravel like leaves. Della Mercer walked down into the water and did not come off her feet. She took the rope from Garrett's shaking hands and looped it twice around her waist and knotted it the way her father had taught her to tie a load that must not shift, and she put one foot down into the brown water and then the other, and she leaned into the current the way she had leaned into 100 jokes from 100 boardwalks, square and planted and unmoved. The creek shoved at her with all it had, and where it had folded grown men in half, it broke around her like water around a piling. Her weight, the very weight they had laughed at on the day she rode in, drove her boots down into the gravel and held her there. She was an anchor where a thinner body would have been a leaf. She got across to the schoolhouse step. She braced herself in the doorway and made of her own body a bridge and a wall, and the schoolmistress passed the children to her, one at a time, and Della passed them back along the rope to the men on the bank, hand over hand. 11 children, the littlest one, a boy of 5 named Joseph Finnegan, Cora's youngest, wrapped twice in her arms and pressed to her broad chest with his face hidden against her, so he would not see the water that wanted him. She felt his heart going like a bird's against her, and she held him the way only a big woman can hold a small, terrified thing with room to spare. And she carried him back across the creek that had taken grown men off their feet and set him in his mother's arms on the high bank. And only then, with all 11 of them counted and accounted for, did she let herself sit down hard in the mud and feel her hands begin to shake. They had not seen her hands shake before. The whole town watched them shake now, and the whole town was quiet, the particular quiet of people who are being taught something they will spend a long time learning. The judge came 2 weeks later, and the courtroom was the back of the Odd Fellows Hall, and it was full because everyone in Hartshorn now had 2 reasons to come. Royce Pelham sat in his good gray waistcoat with his Denver lawyer beside him and a look on his face like a man who has counted the odds and likes them. Della Mercer sat with Marshall Quill and Cora Finnegan and her tally book, and when her turn came, she did not raise her voice, and she did not weep, and she did not perform. She laid the 3 grubstake notes on the table in front of the judge, and beside each one she laid a date, the date the note was signed and the date the man had died, and she said, in the flat, clear voice of a woman reading a column of figures, that a dead man cannot sign his name, and that Royce Pelham had collected on the signatures of 3 men who were already in the ground when his paper said they took up his pen. Pelham's lawyer argued the dates were clerical errors. The judge, who was old and had seen a great many clerical errors in his time, asked to see the original land office filings, and the land office filings did not lie either, and the judge looked at Royce Pelham over the top of his spectacles for a long, long moment. It did not all come right at once, because the law is slow and money is patient. But the 3 claims were returned, Cora Finnegan's first, and Pelham's lien on the little Maud was struck void, and the judge ordered an accounting of every dead miner's claim Pelham had touched in 3 years, which was a thing that would follow the man like a debt collector for the rest of his time in the territory. Pelham sold the mercantile by midsummer and took the southbound stage, and Hartshorn was not sorry to watch the dust of it go. Della Mercer did not go back to peddling out of a wagon. She rented the empty mercantile, the very building where Royce Pelham had told her there was no room in Hartshorn for what she carried, and she put up a plain sign with no flourish, Mercer's, and underneath it, smaller, candles, honey, salves, and goods made honest. She hired Cora Finnegan first, who could keep a clean book once someone showed her she was allowed to, and then she hired a German widow named Frau Keller, who could render tallow and pour candles faster than anyone Della had ever seen, and then a girl of 16, whose father had died in the mine, and who had been told her whole short life that she was slow, and who turned out to be slow at nothing, once a person had the patience to find what she was quick at. Della paid fair wages, and she set a high standard, and she had plain, direct conversations about the quality of the work, and she did not soften any of it to make anyone comfortable, including herself. Asa Brandt came up the street to the new shop on the day she hung the sign, and he stood in the doorway turning his hat in his hands, and he said he had something to say, and would she let him say all of it before she answered. She told him to go on. "I've watched you come into this town with one tired mule and a wagon nobody wanted," he said, "and build a thing in 1 winter that most folks don't build in 10. I watched you stand in a creek that took men twice your strength off their feet, and I watched you carry Cora's boy back across it like he weighed nothing at all. And I'm standing here in your doorway not because you need a single thing from me, I know you don't. You've made that plain to the whole gulch, but because I'm a better man on the days I get to talk to you than I am on the days I don't. That's the whole of it. I'm not asking you for anything. I just thought you ought to hear it said out loud by somebody who isn't ashamed to say it." Della looked at him a good while. "That," she said at last, "is the most honest thing anyone said to me in 11 months. I've had cause to practice honesty lately," Asa said. "Keeping company with you, a man learns there's no profit in any other kind." She did not quite smile. "I'm not an easy woman to stand next to. I say what I think. I hold my prices. I don't make myself smaller so a room feels bigger." "I know," he said. "I've been watching. And here I am, still standing in your doorway. The years that came after were not soft years, because there were no soft years on that side of the mountains, and Della Mercer would not have known what to do with one. There were lean winters and a fire that took half the stock, one February, and a season when the bees died of a blight, and she had to buy wax from Denver and hated every cent of it. But Mercer's opened a second shop down in Buena Vista in the spring of 1889, run by Cora Finnegan with the same clean books and the same fair wages, and the German widow trained 4 more women to pour candles by the dozen, and the slow girl who was slow at nothing became the best dipper in the territory and married a blacksmith and named her first daughter after the woman who had hired her when no one else would. Della married Asa Brandt the autumn after the flood, in the small church on the high ground that the creek had never reached, and she kept her own name over the shop because the men of 3 counties knew it by then, and a name like that is worth money. She never stopped hiring women that other people had decided were not worth the trouble. She never stopped keeping clean books, and she never once let a man drop a thing in her hand like she was a slop bucket without charging him for the privilege. And the people of Hartshorn told the story the way mountain people tell the stories that matter. Not all at once, but in pieces, over winter fires, to newcomers who hadn't heard it. They always started the same way. They said a wide young woman came up out of the timber on a dying mule with a wagon full of candles, and the whole town laughed at her before she'd set her brake. And then the snow came, and then the snow went, and then the creek rose, and when it rose and the children were in the water, and the bravest men in the gulch were standing on the bank doing arithmetic, it was not one of those men who walked down into the brown roar and would not be moved. It was the woman they had laughed at on the day she came. The thing they had mocked her for was the thing the current could not knock down, her weight against the water, her broad arms with room to hold a frightened child clean off the flood, and against her heart. There are people who are handed beauty at birth, and people handed comfort, and people handed every advantage the world keeps in its store, and waste the lot. Della Mercer was handed a body. The world spent 24 years telling her was the first and worst fact about her, the thing a person needed to settle before they could decide what she was worth. She walked out into that world every single morning anyway, and she made things in it, and she added the columns no one else would add, and she stood in the water that took stronger people off their feet, and she did not ask anyone's leave, and she did not apologize, and she did not make herself 1 inch smaller so that smaller men could feel large. Whatever a person's worth is measured by, it was never the width of her. It was the size of what she was willing to stand against. And by that measure, there was not a larger soul in the whole of that gulch, and there never had been. Whatever the world keeps telling you, is your flaw might be the very thing someone needs from you someday. Della never shrank to fit a room, and when the water came, the strength they mocked was the strength that carried children home. So stand where you stand, do your honest work, hold your prices, and be kind to the next tired soul who comes in out of the cold. Please note, this story was created and fictionalized by AI to bring you a little entertainment while sharing a warm and positive lesson for everyday life.